Hello and welcome to the D365 Insights podcast brought to you by Source and Connect. Today is episode 12, ERP delivery through different eyes from the partner and client insights. This is, as I said, our 12th episode and we're recording in December, so one a month. And I'm really excited to bring on Jim Farmakis and Chris Jones. Jim from the partner side, lots and lots of experience as a senior finance consultant and solution architect, and Chris from the end user side, lots and lots of different positions within ERP, IT applications, and enterprise architecture. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you each briefly introduce your role and perspective, Jim from the Microsoft partner side and Chris from the client side, and how you've been involved in ERP F&O implementations?
Of course. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having us today. I've been about 10 years now in the ERP delivery space, working with MS clients for the past 6 years. I've been a solution architect for the past few years, but mostly in the finance delivery. All my background is in finance, and I've engaged in the past few years in multiple type of projects, either larger scale or smaller scale, government, private sector, in multi-country rollouts, etc. So that's a little bit of a brief from myself.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So as you pointed out, I've been on the end user side. I have been a systems manager for the last 9 years through multiple different implementations. So 3 implementations total of D365 specifically. I have made it up to a solutions director level within organizations, and those organizations have ranged from telecoms, healthcare, and more recently, service industry.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great to have you both on. So, from your vantage point, what does a successful ERP delivery look like?
Jim, do you want to go first, or shall I?
Sure, I'll go first. Fine. Well, a successful ERP delivery should be assessed from multiple points. So let's start with the concept of the solution, right? The solution has to scale with the business, and it needs to provide robustness and automation, right? When we look at, though, an ERP delivery, you have to look from the project perspective. Are we meeting the scope? Are we meeting the timeline? And lastly, you need to take into consideration the user. So is the system adopted by the business, not just deployed? So do the users engage with it? Do they participate? Are they early enough into the process? So these are the 3 key elements I would suggest of a successful ERP delivery.
Yeah. I think from the client side, the successful delivery, obviously, the client is interested in obviously keeping to budget, keeping to timelines. But ultimately, it's that delivery, that the ERP that is delivered. Obviously, we're here to talk about Dynamics, but it could be any of them. It could be SAP, etc. Don't want to mention too many names. Don't want to give people wrong idea. But it's really about it delivering the business value. And I think the success of an ERP delivery really depends on how it's set up in the first place. And that means for the end user, in our case, the client, needs to know why they're delivering this ERP. What's it going to benefit in the business? What are its intents? So with F&O, what in finance is it going to do for you? What in your supply chain is it going to do for you? Or are you intending it for it to do to you? So that you can then actually have a way of measuring that success. Because all the things Jim mentioned are absolutely right, and they're all great. You've got the users; they've got to adopt and use a system. You've got to have, the tech will stand the test of time. It's maintainable. It's not going to fall over 4 days after launch. It looks great at launch and then collapses. But you have to understand why, because then you can actually build the measures to go, this is working, great, we keep that going. And the bits that then maybe aren't working so well, you then have a way of measuring it to work out how you fix it. Because an ERP delivery there's a go live, which we're all aware of, and we all celebrate our go lives. They're fantastic. It's a big part of the achievement. But the successful delivery is then what happens 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, and the next 3-5 years that you have the system for, that still works. that the solution is truly embedded. And that only works if the business are engaged in it and they know from the top down why they want to use that system. It also applies to any future enhancements you're going to make to that system as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really fair point. From a recruitment perspective, obviously, I support businesses who are doing the implementation, so that can actually be supporting partners and end user clients as well. But I also get a lot of business as usual roles, and one that's really, really popular is a finance systems manager. So somebody to come in and actually help them utilize the system to the best of its ability post go live. So really good point there, Chris. Thank you. So what do you see as the biggest challenge in ERP F&O implementations, and how do they differ between partner and the client perspectives?
I'll go first this time, then. Let's take turns. Let's be nice.
Okay.
So from the client side, I think it's setting expectations. And that's internally with your stakeholders, whether that's your C-suite, your finance director, who, whatever levels of the people engaged and who's footing the bill. It's setting clear expectations, and that's both from the internal IT team members. So you mentioned a finance system manager. Yeah, I've managed the whole scope, F&O plus CE, the whole stack. And it's setting that expectation correctly. And it's making sure that when engaging with the partner, that the partner is also setting those expectations fairly with the leadership team. Because partners, especially the salesperson who comes in first, because it's normally a salesperson who comes in first before you then get the lovely people like Jim who come in and actually try and deliver what's been promised. The salespeople sometimes have a tendency of overselling what can be delivered. And if you start in that position where you have a sales pitch which is up here, anything less than that starts to tick those boxes of, is this a failed delivery? Are we spending too much? Is it taking too long? Because when you came in, you said you were going to do this in 6 months, and it was going to cost, put a few zeros on a page and a pound sign. And every time something away from that drifts, it causes problems. And that's the challenge. It's keeping the business engaged and keeping the partnership between client and partner healthy, because all the time it's healthy, you'll deliver well together, and you'll go past these challenges because you'll be aligned and working together. When there becomes that disconnect of expectation that's been set with the client versus what the partners can or is delivering, that's the biggest challenge, because these implementations don't take 2 months. They don't take a few weeks. They take a year, they take 18 months, depending on the scale of your business, and sometimes longer. And that's the challenge. It's keeping the relationship solid so that it is actually a true partnership, not us and them, because that becomes a very toxic environment very quickly and not one anyone wants to work in, which then also means you won't deliver. Even the lower stuff that you were always going to deliver will suddenly become a struggle, because getting the right people in the room, they don't want to be there because the environment's not a fun place to be in, and the business has still got a business to run. And that's where I see it from the client side, is setting of expectations versus potential delivery. And the more it's realistic up front, the smoother journey you'll have with it, because you're aware of those challenges up front. So I think it's always expectation setting.
Good points, Chris. I'd like to add some extra to these points, but more from the partner's perspective. And I will comment on as well to the point of the scope increasing, or this is what the expectation was, and this is what you received. A big pain point for the partner is process ownership, decision making. Okay, and bad process ownership or decision making leads to rework. Okay, the pain point for a partner on this matter is that the team is deployed to deliver on a fixed timeline. The billing is on a daily basis. And if there is not enough echo quickly, because it's a partnership, right? The partner needs to understand the business better. But if the answers are not coming in quick enough, the data is not clear enough, and there needs to be a lot of back and forth, that automatically is taking the project to move much slower than you would expect. And this is where the concept of ownership comes in. From a client's perspective, what I've observed is the balancing the BAU workload with the project demands for the employees. Because this is, for me, going in a project, this is my full-time job. That's all I will do all day. But most of the times that I speak to my clients, I realize that they have this 1 hour call with me and then 6 hours of firefighting BAU. It's not their fault. I'm not blaming them for not coming back early, but I have to also go to my PM and say, I won't meet timeline because I don't have any of the answers. And on a separate point, but again, in the same context, I think the one thing that both partner and client try to avoid is managing the scope creep, where you enter the project with a generic approach of, oh, we want this, we want that. And as soon as you start more getting into the details, this much work becomes this much work. And then the partner has to go to the client and say, we need to increase the billing. The client will say, why? And this is something that no one wants to do.
Really good points, and great to see you kind of from both sides, and you can kind of answer some of Chris's pain points and give a bit of perspective on it. So the next question is around change management, which comes up in nearly every one of my podcasts. It seems to be one of the most important things. So change management is often cited as the hardest part of ERP projects. How do you approach it differently as a partner versus client?
Okay. I think the challenge here falls a lot more to the client because they have to convince the business to adopt this. So I'll let Chris speak a lot more on this than I will. From the partner side is providing adequate training, enabling the business to adopt the solution, set up the correct framework. But the most important thing for both partner and client, in my opinion, is communication, role mapping, adoption, things like that, to ensure that the team that engages with the software does not see this as a replacement or as something to come and make their life more difficult, but as something that comes in as a solution to some of their problems.
Yeah.
Chris?
I think this comes sort of back to both my point and Jim's point from earlier. So mine around expectation setting and Jim's conversation around engaging with the business. So when you set up for an ERP, you'll most of the time, I'm not saying everybody does it, but you should be doing an RFP. You should be getting that understanding of every function you're going to put into this ERP, whether that's just finance or it's finance and SCM, or it's wider into sales, field service, everything else. Every function needs to have its needs listed in the RFP, because if you're going to deliver it all, you have to understand it all. And that's two parts. One is to have that listed, and so you can actually quantify it, get it down on paper, show what it is, because you need to understand yourself as a business as well. Because if I go to a partner and say, hey, we want a very vanilla ERP, here's our RFP, and it's literally just, oh, I want to be able to do some accounts payable, I want to do my financial reporting at the end of the month. And then they quote, and then as they're starting to build, you're, to Jim's point, going, I need this, I need that, because they're all their little, for businesses, all have developed their own processes, whether it's in Excel, another system, it's their approval process, all these kind of things that are currently off the board or not on a system. Dropping those in after you've started build or you're towards the end of design, etc., is going to lengthen your project. So, and normally on a T&M is going to cost you more on a fixed cost. Again, you're going to have to raise a change to get it to happen. And so the more you can prepare up front as a business, as an enterprise, get your processes sorted. The best implementations I've been a part of, the work on the processes of how the business wanted to operate was done up front. And that means going out within the business. You might need to bring people in, you might have the team already internally, but you need to go and analyze how your business works now. And is that how you want it to work? Because if there's any changes you need to make them now before you tell your partner what you want to build. Because building it later, it's going to cost 2-3 times as much when it's done as a change versus when it's in the original build. So it's about all that prep up front. And that prep up front isn't just send a BA to go and write a couple of nice process maps as is in a 2B. It's about the business leaders really engaging with their teams about the change that's going to be coming as well. Because the other problem you potentially have is if it's siloed and it's leadership only who've done this process mapping, the partner then builds it, you then release it to the business, and the business has no understanding of how it is. So people are working out in a warehouse, people on the finance team, people in the sales force had no engagement in it. You'll have a whole bunch of changes that come in immediately after launch or during UAT, because those people who've been brought on to test it will suddenly go, I don't work like this, because you haven't told them that their process is expected to change. And so change management it's always got to be there. You've got to have control, you've got to have governance, it's got to be strong. But you will have less change, less scope creep if you prepare properly up front and you engage the teams that are going to receive this. So they know what's coming, and you can make changes in what you want before it's built. And then when the partner comes in, you've got an RFP. So you might have a bunch of partners, and you have an RFP which is solid, and they can quote it. There's always going to be a few things because you're not going to be 100% perfect. We're all human. But the more detail you get up front, the more likely you are to get a project which is potentially delivered on time, delivered at the cost you're expecting from your partner, and actually does what you're expecting it to do. And so change management should be a last recourse. The reason it's hard is because you're always asking somebody to dip into their pockets. But this comes back to expectation setting. And whether it's the partners who've come in to do this RFP, or you have a consultancy, or you have a strong IT leader within your business before you start the project, the expectation starts there, which is we need, as an organization, to know what we want. If we know what we want, we can control and govern what we get. If we say, I want an ERP, and I have no more insight than that, the partner is going to be billing us millions and millions because we can't guide them. We aren't giving them signposts to hit. So they just build what we tell them as we tell them through the process. And that's a recipe for blown budgets, blown timelines, bad environment, and bad partnership. So business prepares. And if I was to put myself in the shoes of a consultancy, I would be suggesting that to my client as I come to them. Be upfront, be honest. We need you to have this ready for this to be successful. This will help you lock to the price we quote. If you haven't done this, this is going to grow. And then you get a better reputation as a partner as well, because you're being truthful about the situation.
Great, thank you. So what are the most common misunderstandings or misalignments between partners and clients during delivery? I'm scared to ask this question.
Right. So let me start on this. I know it's your turn, Chris, but I'll take the talking stick. I'll start because my response to this, Sarah, follows up very well with what Chris was explaining now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a very common misunderstanding is misreading the capacity, right? Clients that assume that the partner drives everything, and the partner assumes that the client will provide the SMEs. Okay. The idea behind this, where you hire a partner, and because the project's expensive and the fees are high and the consulting and the team is large, assuming that they will take ownership of everything, and you sit back and then they'll say, here it is, everything is perfect. This is the problem that Chris is explaining from the client side. And this is a very common misunderstanding. We hire this X amount of million big project, therefore we don't have to do anything. You need to resource so strongly into that client business to be able to reciprocate to that partner, so all the issues that Chris mentioned won't happen. So mapping your business processes, understanding your pain points. The partner cannot come in and tell you where your business is suffering. You have to tell them. And this is a very common misunderstanding that aligns very well with the point Chris made earlier. And that what set sometimes unrealistic timelines to due to understanding the data migration, testing cycles, things like that. But all boils down to this one point: how well the business understands what they need to build, what are their pain points. So that's my point on the misunderstanding subject.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I would echo Jim on that, and I touched on some of it beforehand. It's about what's expected and what's needed, and it's yeah, a lot of businesses do, because I've joined a business and they've gone, oh yeah, aren't the partner doing that? No. And that's the thing, a lot of businesses don't understand that, and I can tell them, and I would hope other people who've had my positions and experience would be telling the leadership of, I guess, the non-IT functions in the business who've been through an ERP implementation themselves. This is what we're going to have to put on the table, and you can't shy away from it, because if you don't backfill SMEs, you know, to Jim's point earlier about people having BAU crushing them, shall we say, at the same time as carving out an hour to have a meeting with a consultant. Well, actually, what Jim needs as a consultant is that SME to not only have that hour free to have that discussion, but to have some hours previous for them to prepare for the discussion. So, like I don't want to give the game away too much, but prepared a little bit for this meeting by discussing what we might want to talk about. If you don't prepare for it, that SME is going to come to the meeting. Jim's going to have some questions to ask that he's thought of, but he doesn't know, as Jim pointed out, Jim doesn't know what the problems in the business are, or what some of these other processes that Jim may not be expecting them to be doing, shall we say, are. And that's what trips the projects up. And that's where the misalignments happen as well, is because people seem afraid to talk sometimes, because as a business, you have to be completely honest about what you do to your partner in each of the functions, because it allows them to then build or account for it. Things that happen off systems now, the SME will have a don't ask, don't tell policy almost, that if Jim doesn't ask a question about it, or other consultants are available, although Jim is a very good one, is if Jim doesn't ask that question, they won't think to throw out and go, oh, we were talking about this, but do you know about that? Because we do this when this happens. And if they don't throw those things out there, again, come back around to change again. And that's where I've seen misalignments happen the most, is you need to have cards on the table about, as a partner, we need you to give us SMEs. And the client on the other side needs to turn around and say, okay, so what exactly are you going to do for us? It's breaking down assumptions and asking the questions of, what do you need from us? And realistically, not, oh, we need an hour from a guy a week. No, you need an hour of a meeting, but you need to give them time to prep for that meeting. And I'll give you a list of questions a week ahead so they can answer it and be transparent, and give them the freedom to be transparent. And it's that. It's avoiding assumptions, which means you have to lay all your cards on the table, both sides, so that you can build trust. It's much like having a good relationship with a friend or with a romantic partner. Relationships work best when you're not assuming something about the other and you're open and honest with one another. And that's what causes the misalignment, is lack of transparency and lack of openness.
Communication.
Yep.
Communication is key. Great, thank you. So how can both sides build trust and transparency throughout the project lifecycle?
Shall I go, Jim? You stole my stick last time. So again, from the start, be open. Be open about what pains cause. So if I'm a client, if I'm the business, because that's the role I'm playing here and that's the role I've played, I want the partner to tell me what's going to be a struggle. Where am I going to have pain during this process? You know, you're roughly suggesting this implementation is going to, let's say, a year. Where am I going to have pain? What do I need to be thinking about during each stage? Because the more open up front, it builds that trust straight away. You know, what's going to cause you pain? Where am I going to get billed more? What's going to cause this to slip? It's the same, again, it's laying your cards on the table, being open with one another about what you're good at, what you're not so good at, what you need the other one to do for you. Because if you lay those out and you both then can see, I need you to take this. So to Jim's point around who the client has in resource, I need the partner to tell me, we've spoken about this. We would expect you to have a team of these kind of people with this kind of expertise. Do you have them? Because if we don't, we shouldn't be starting yet. And give the client the chance to get the team in place and aligned. Because if the partner immediately wants to kick off and go and start billing when the client isn't ready, you're building enmity because you're going to just burn time. You're just going to pay money for, in effect, very little. There's some work the partner can do to get set up, granted. And the business on the other side needs to be transparent with the partner about where they are, what they've got, because otherwise they're set the partner up to fail. If I'm a mess internally, I don't know what my processes are. I'm a group entity and I've got 10 countries or 15 or 20 countries and every one of them operates differently. And I don't tell the partner that. And we've done nothing about standardization. The partner's in for a nightmare. And they've gone, oh, we've assumed that you've got one way of working, one target operating model. This project's 12 months. Every country has to operate differently. And I'm not talking about localizations. I'm talking about genuinely, they just work differently. That project's actually 2 years or 3 years because you suddenly have to build loads of custom bespoke processes, or the partner's going to have to sit with the client and help them work out how to standardize their operating model. And either one of those is a recipe for more time, more money spent, more effort, and it breaks trust boundaries because you haven't been honest upfront about where you are and what you're asking for the other one to deliver.
There's a lot of good points there raised from Chris. And the question here, Sarah, is interesting because building trust and transparency, there's a lot of weight on this to the partner, and it falls individually and collectively to the consultants. Chris and I have worked in the past in a partner-client relationship, and we've experienced this level of transparency required. And from a partner's perspective, as a consultant, it's always a challenge walking in on a business discovery. So in the very beginning of a nice greenfield implementation where everything should run smoothly, and having to pull the client on the side and say, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. No one wants to start like that, but that's what it takes to build rapport. Showing up, knowing your material, accept what you don't know, acknowledge it, say, I'll come back to you on this one. Don't just come up with an answer. There's little things like that that I believe they go a long way. No one expects you to know everything. So the first thing, to be transparent, I think it's a very good rate management in the beginning. All the risks, the assumptions, the issues, the dependencies, you have to air them out. And no one wants to do that day one. So here we are, first meeting. Let's open in a positive vibe. There's many problems we have to address day one. No one wants to set the precedent of firefighting, but this is the reality of every project. The second bit is setting those kind of expectations early. What the partner owns, what the client owns. Like on the point that we were discussing earlier, you can't enter an implementation where a business assumes that you are the partner and you will own everything, even knowing and understanding the solution on their behalf. That can't work. So these are the main challenges from a partner's perspective to be able to establish this form of transparency early on.
Brilliant, thank you. So what role does communication cadence play in keeping projects on track?
Is it my turn?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, Chris said it earlier. I mean, communication is everything. Let's start it with a different question. You tell me any relationship that does not require it. Let's start with that. Ignore a project implementation. There's no format of relationship in human interaction that communication is not key.
Mm-hmm.
The ERP delivery framework, based on what most partners and clients do, have a series of communication elements. Okay, there's stand-up calls in a daily basis for alignment. There's steerco meetings for decision making, escalation pathways. The key of that is utilizing those tools effectively. Where what you don't want to see is people showing up in stand-up calls and just telling, I've done that, zoning out everybody else, just saying their part so they can punch card and say, I've done my bit. Or going into a steerco, either client or partner, unprepared to make a decision, right? Because then you're causing project delays. The communication framework elements are in place. Are they used correctly is the question. And the last bit that I mentioned is the escalation pathways. I don't think there's anything more important than that in the communication level for both client and partner, because that falls back into the concept of ownership. If on a stream of work that I own, I see problems, how do I challenge them? How do I escalate it? How do I communicate them to the business without causing damage to the overall project? And I think there's a lot of prejudice behind this topic for both partners and clients, where you may have, from a client's perspective, an SME, where at their own stream, at their own practice, they can see something may fundamentally going wrong or in a different direction, but they're not having the appropriate authority to challenge it. And then they have to go and escalate it to a manager, where they're putting things in their assumption at risk, things like the timeline, and they may not be heard. But all of those issues are going to come and catch up with you in UAT if you're lucky, or after go live if you're unlucky. So that's why these communication elements are important to be utilized correctly. That's my point.
Yeah, I think Jim's got a great point, and I think it's communication. You mentioned cadence and the frequency. I would hope that, or expect, well, I'm kind of sit somewhere in there, that process product owners would be speaking daily with their consultant or the lead consultant for the processes they own, because they need that persistent, where are we with it? What's not right? What questions have you got? Who do we need to get in the room together? Because that solves the problems of the build maintaining its progress, or the design maintaining its progress. Jim's right. The escalation path is the process and product owner should be able to own their area to the point of making decisions on things like field names, drop downs, all this kind of stuff, so that it's not always escalated up to a finance director, an ops director, or even C-suite. It should be in the team. The power should be there. And only when the two parties come to an impasse, so between the consultant potentially and the process or product owner, that they then need to escalate it to a project manager, program manager, to go and have a more robust discussion about, okay, we really need this. How can we get it delivered? Or vice versa. And so the cadence has to be appropriate for the team. So Jim mentioned a few. Steercos should probably be monthly in most projects. They don't need to be more frequently. You don't need to drag all the people with big titles and lots of paycheck into one room, because it costs too much. It does. And realistically, if a project can't function without steerco being involved every week, the project's not functioning. So the project managers should be engaged with their respective teams and cross-team regularly, probably weekly. The individual constituents of consultants and SMEs or process owners, whichever roles you want them to play, daily. Because it's about what each function does, so therefore how frequently it happens. And again, as long as that communication is happening and the people are talking to each other and being honest about things, they'll get it done. And freeing the people to have the time to communicate as well.
I was just going to add as well that it's must be down to the people, the individuals as well, with communication, and how good that individual is at. You were mentioning obviously having challenging conversations, Jim. You have some individuals that are really good at putting things across in an empathetic way, and others that maybe struggle in that situation. So it's also down to what individuals you have on the team, the different teams, and how they go about the communication as well. I can imagine that probably plays an element of it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You cannot remove the human element from all these
Yeah,
human interactions.
yeah, absolutely.
And I've got
So looking back, what's one lesson you've learned that you wish you'd known at the start of your ERP journey?
Chris?
oh, go on, I'll take it. So I think it is one of the things I flagged earlier is don't assume. Yeah. So even for myself, when I've come in as a new IT manager director who's part of this implementation team, and that's why I get brought in nowadays, is do not assume that the business has all their ducks in a row. You need to do your own reconnaissance, if you will, dig in and see, okay, how's that working? You know, if you've got a team who work with you, what do you understand? What do you know about how the business works? And go and see it. And I think this is unfortunately a common thing for IT. The more IT is embedded in everything around a business, the more IT can no longer be sat in a cupboard. Like the old IT Crowd TV show, they're locked in the basement, kept away from everybody. You need to get out and engage with your business. So if I'm brought in as an IT director, solution director, whatever title, I need to go and see how the business operates. So I've got a feel for it. And that means going out with a salesperson. That means going and watching, go and see finance work and how they use the systems, because it gives me a better feel and understanding for it. And it also helps me uncover the problems that I'm going to face later down the road, or that I can start addressing now so they aren't problems further down the road. Too many people, I think, come in and go, okay, cool, let's start doing this, without understanding who they're dealing with. And so my journey, my lesson is never assume. Go and make sure that you and your team are aware of what needs to be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The not taking assumptions. From a partner's perspective, I have, for me, this is a very important question, Sarah. What's the one thing you've learned through this journey and you wish you knew? And this is my take. So focus on the business value of a solution, not the technical characteristics. Okay. We're not implementing software, we're implementing solutions that their impact to the business is measurable with expected ROI. One of the phrases I used in my new business, coming in as a contractor, is transforming today, defining tomorrow. We're not there to deploy some software and walk away. We're here to measure the business, understand the problems, understand the pain points, and provide scalable solutions that will lead them into the future. Like Chris said earlier, this is not a solution for today. This is not patch fixing. This is where the business is going to drive in the next 10 years. You can't come in and say, let's just see what they're doing here. This is how you do it in this system. I coded things. Let me show you a technical key. No, you need to see what the problems, where is value into this delivery for this business. So this is my take on this question.
Absolutely. So leading on from that, then, what advice would you give to organizations embarking on their first ERP F&O implementation?
Is it me?
Go on.
I think so.
Well, so I'll go back to Chris's point. Invest heavily in your SMEs and your internal team so you can be able to absorb the solution, understand it. You cannot outsource that. You need to be able to understand your solutions, understand your processes. Another point, I say avoid over customizations. You need to trust the platform. Okay. Put customizations where the platform does not serve you. Do not try to reinvent the wheel. Big mistake. And lastly, I say you need to prioritize things like data, testing, training from day one. You cannot start engaging in those areas near UAT. You need to start from day one, putting a plan in place to avoid this disjointment that Chris mentioned in the previous point of the change management. So start early on those subjects. So these are my points for this.
You've both talked about SMEs in the business quite a bit and investing in SMEs. Can you just sort of explain a little bit about that. Do you mean, because a lot of businesses that I recruit for will bring in contractors, so we might have a finance consultant or a supply chain consultant that's on the end user side, and then they will go and do the requirements gathering. Is that what you mean by an SME, or do you mean somebody within the business, or bringing in permanent staff? Could you, just
It,
talk about
it
that a bit more?
you're right. It could be a third party hired just for this delivery, could be someone that is hired by the business permanently. I'm not
Yeah.
going to look into their contractual agreement, whether that is a permanent employee or a third party
Yeah.
contractor. But what you cannot do as a business is take people that have a specific function in the business with a full-time capacity and say, right, you know how you were doing all of that work? Now you're going to do this work as well.
Mm,
This, you can't do that,
mm,
because this is the topic we were discussing earlier of managing BAU and delivery. This is a full-time job for both
yeah.
of us. And the more the business will ignore to do and will assume the partner will do, the more the billing is going to come, right? Because the partner is not the same cost in hours as your employees, whether they're permanent or contractors.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry, I think I butt in, Chris, before you were going to answer. So I'll
it's okay.
hand over to you.
So I'll take both of your questions.
Okay.
So what advice on giving organizations on their first ERP? To be fair, it's any, if it's your first, your 10th, your 100th ERP implementation, why? Why are you doing it? And I'm not saying that as God don't do it. I'm saying what's driving you? Because too many times I've heard, whether interviewing for new roles or once in the door, oh, we're doing it because our owner said so. We're doing it because our current platform has gone out of support. They're all initial kicks as to do it, but they're not why you've chosen to do an ERP. So if it's because your old one's going out of support, okay, why did you have that ERP? What does it do for you that a bunch of Excels and a couple of light SaaS apps don't do for you? So why? Because if you don't know why, you'll struggle to get where you want to go. And that's more than just ERP implementations. There's a fairly famous guy called Simon Sinek who's written a book of Start With Why. It's massively true. If you don't know as a person why you do what you want, why you're doing what you're doing, you're not going to do it to the best ability. You're unlikely to be passionate about it. If you don't know why you're spending 5 million, 10 million, 50 million on an ERP, you're never going to get value out of it, and it's never going to feel like a good deal because you don't know why you're doing it. So get the why down. Make your team, so all of the leadership and all of your stakeholders who are engaged, understand the why. Make your SMEs understand the why, and get the teams who are going to be engaged with it to understand the why. We're going on a journey to deliver this new project, quite often with a nice catchy title. This is why we're doing it. And make it personal to each of the teams. For sales, this is why we're doing it. For finance, this is why we're doing it for you. This is what we're going to make easier for you. This is how we're going to make your day more enjoyable. You're not going to be entering the same data in 5 different places anymore. We're going to make that simpler. It's only going to go in one place, and the system's going to take care of it for you. That's what I would tell anybody who's doing an ERP implementation. Get your why, and then you can drive towards it. And then the system you deliver should all be pointed to deliver the why. And then you will have less scope creep. You'll have less changes because you'll have thought about it first as to what you're aiming for. And then to take the second part, SMEs, which I mentioned, is I personally think the SMEs freed up from the business to engage with a consultancy where we are talking about a partner-client model have to have business experience. They have to be people you trust in your business that do those roles. Because bringing in a third party, because you brought in a third party who's a partner, they don't know your business. They know roughly how certain processes within most businesses work. There'll be some nuance for you. So they've got that experience. If you bring in yet another third party consultant who's never been in that business before, they bring very little new to the party. To your point, so if you bring in a D365 finance consultant specialist on top of the one the partner's already provided for you, okay, they might be given more time within the business. They can spend the time, But day one, they're both in exactly the same place. Day one of a project, your SME needs to be, I've got a year, 5 years, 10 years of experience. Whoever you've got who's actually genuinely good. And it's not just about experience, it's about capability and understanding of their role. They should be light years ahead of a consultant at that point in terms of their processes and why the business does what they do. They might know nothing about D365, but they know their processes and they know the why of why the business does what it does, because they need to be able to answer the partner consultant questions. And if you can't answer the partner consultant's questions, you're just a middleman. You're just going to bounce around everybody in the department trying to find an answer. So your SMEs need to be experts in your business. So subject matter expert in your business. And
just to answer on this point before you move
yeah.
on, Chris, sorry to interrupt you. You're right, but that would presume you can only have this opportunity fulfilled internally. And this is where I would disagree a little bit to the approach. Take exactly your point. All that says to me is resource early. Instead of engaging with the partner and the same time onboarding your SMEs, which, like you suggested very correctly, if they just join the business, they're exactly standing with the partner saying, let's discover what happens in here. That's what resource early means. Resource early, create your book of business process, create your business blueprint and mapping, because the bottom line is this: you can't have only SMEs that are from your business because they don't know implementation. They may be experts in your O2C or P2P or R2R processes of what you do, but they may not be able to carry out a vision of what they could be doing. They may not be familiar with rollout cycles. They may not be familiar with the solutions that are coming in to be implemented. And then therefore that falls to the partner to upskill them to all of those areas so they can be the SME of what is to be, not what they had. So it's a bit of a mix here to what your resource profile will look like. Sorry for the interruption, please carry on.
No, actually, no, fair enough. And every day is a learning day. And I take your point in the sense of, yes, I've brought on guys before and girls who have been more expert in their functional area than the people in the business. But to your point about, so both points stand in the sense of, yes, if you try and bring everybody in the same day one to start together, you can't have a third party. You can't have another third party. However, that presumes or assumes, and I did say not to assume earlier, so I'm going against myself, is that actually your project starts the day the partner turns up. And it doesn't. And actually, maybe, on top of the why, because I love that one, and I think it is key, Jim's point of resourcing earlier is when you know you want to do an ERP, that's when you start bringing people in. And because you need to understand your business. And yes, to Jim's point, some of the third-party consultants you'll get out there, contractors, they might present themselves as consultants or they might present themselves as BAs, but specialists in implementations. Get them in early, a few months ahead of the contract, maybe further than that, ahead of the partner, because you need to understand yourself. And so therefore, doing the book of processes, you're targeting an operating model. That's first. And trying to do that after the partner's joined, you're just increasing cost. So, okay, so it doesn't, your question wasn't what one piece of advice, it's what advice. So there's several. Understand your why, resource early, and free your people to engage in the project. So to that point of Jim's earlier about somebody who's got, I expand on a little bit then. Some of your SMEs, if they are going to come from your business, they need to not be doing their day job. So that sometimes is where you maybe flip it on its head, and rather than bringing in a consultant who has implementation experience, if you're happy with the person within the business, backfill them. Get somebody to do their day job for 6 months or a year or however long you need in the project. Again, comes back to the expectation setting of how long they're going to need the person for during the project, and let them be free to do it, because you will get the best value if your functional business units are engaged in the project, because then they're your best advocates for it as well.
Great advice. Thank you, guys. So moving on to the last few questions now. So what skills or mindsets be most important for both partners and clients in the next wave of ERP projects?
The one that I appreciate the most, and because we're looking at mindsets here, is the collaborative mindset. Okay, so partners and clients behaving as one team. Everybody says that, everybody hears it all the time, but I've had the luck to see it in one of my most recent projects. And behaving as one team is the best way to work. Very hard to do, very important for the solution. One team means the client and the partner pretend that they're in one department. And the most important way to achieve this, in my opinion, is drop the blame game. The blame game is very important only for the subject of commercials. So when it comes to the billing, that's the only thing that it serves. I like this expression. I don't remember who said it, but I like the expression that says, um, the person who blames others has a long way to go. The person who blames themselves is much closer. The person who blames no one has arrived. Because when you face a problem, it doesn't matter in the end of the day what caused it. Is how are we moving forward? What's the solution? Saying it was Chris's fault or Jim's fault or Sarah's fault. How is this enabling us to move forward as a team? So this is the one key element, the blame game, being removed, especially from the functional team, so they can behave as one team. So that's the one advice I would give on this subject.
Yeah. I think you do have to truly be open with one another. And you therefore have to collaborate as if you're all one team, one unit. If you're a project team, you're a project team. So, name your project, become that team. So you're not the partner. You're not necessarily even potentially the client. You are the project team, and you'll work together to solve the problems to get through it. I think, as well as that, I think you've got to be open to new ideas. So sometimes more on my side, the client side, there is we've always done it this way. We want to keep on doing it this way. So to Jim's point about sometimes customization, forcing, your new ERP to suddenly work in a way because you've worked that way for 20 years, is be open to new ideas. There's a balance. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it's going to cost you an extra 500,000 to implement it that way, it better really be the best way of doing it. And it is, what you do as standard within your business, what you do like any other business does, whether you might do it slightly differently at the moment. Be open to the fact that actually 90% of businesses will have a very similar, let's say, approval process for purchase orders. Be like them. It doesn't change your business. It's not the differentiator in making you grow as a business that your purchase order process, has bells and whistles on it and is colored, violet or something. What makes a difference for your business? That's where potentially you want customization. And it's allowing yourself and the team to be open to that. That your partner's going to come and suggest new ideas to you because they know this new system that you potentially haven't seen before. Be open to those ideas. Work together to find a solution that is the best result for your business. And that's what I think helps.
Great point, Chris. I want to add a little bit to this from the partner side, because this is a great point that Chris is bringing. The concept of legacy system thinking, right? This is how we've done things. Even the partner needs to be very careful from this mistake, saying, show me how you were doing something. Okay, I can show you how you can do this in Dynamics. This is not in your implementation. This is just adapting your existing processes in another software. You're not adopting the solution. That's why you have to be open for process reengineering and say, how could we be doing things better? Is this the most scalable way to work? Is this the most automated and efficient way to work? Ignore what you were doing for both partner and client. So that was a really good point. I just wanted to add a bit more.
Yeah, no, it's good. And yeah, and I think that then, and I'll keep on saying it, and I might become a bit of a broken record, is why? Yeah. So to your question, your point there, Jim, is why do you do it like that? Because if you know that, you can change the solution as long as you deliver the why.
So moving on to, if you had to summarize one key element of success in ERP delivery from your perspective, what would it be? We've kind of already answered this, and I think I will know what Chris will say. But yeah, if you had to summarize one key element of success in ERP, what would it be?
You say one, so I'll just stick with one word: ownership. Okay, clear definition of each area, experts taking responsibility for the successful delivery. Okay, that ownership. And that comes with stream responsibility. The important part of this is the gray zones, and this is something that commonly overlooked. Finance consultant, supply chain consultant, there's a massive gray zone where this person's work affects this person's work, and the cross paths between them. Who takes ownership of that? The gray zones in these projects. So, and again, F&O with CE integration, right? Who takes ownership of that? Third-party integration. Who takes ownership of these gray areas? That's the most important thing to avoid these massive delays, and or when these two areas do not work very well together. And that's where you need a strong architect or a program director to be able to influence this merge of these two areas and the union of them, and that they work cohesively. So ownership is the one from me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm see your question. I can read one of two ways. It's either an element of how to be successful during a project, or an element that shows me it's successful afterwards. And to say your ERP has been a success, I think, is measured by its adoption. And that's, again, getting back out in the business and seeing that people are following the processes as intended, that they're using the system as intended. And some of that you can read from the support tickets they raise, because if you get loads and loads of how-tos, your training hasn't been successful because nobody knows how to actually work the new system. If you get loads and loads of errors, then the technical implementation's potentially been failed because it's buggy and it's gone through UAT and somehow still got there. But you will always get some tickets, and having a few tickets isn't not saying it's successful. It's just what those tickets are. You know, quite often it's how can I do this extra thing? You know, and that's not so bad. But I think success is people use the system, and you don't hear noise about it from the day-to-day people who are using it, because it's familiar, it's easy, and they're just doing it. And that's, for me, when success has happened, is your system's being used day to day. It's humming along nicely. Yeah, you'll always get tickets, you'll always have some questions, but there's not a fire over here, a fire over there. It's working, and people are happy. And then you get the joy of everybody having great new ideas. And that's, I think, maybe it's that one. That the tickets or changes you get asked for are new ideas, because they're showing that people have adopted the system and they want to make it better and forward, rather than asking change requests which take you backwards, to go back to legacy systems or legacy ways of working. If what you're seeing is that people are forward and positive and trying to make things better, I think then you've had success.
Very good. So last thing then, what's the one thing you'd like listeners to take away from this conversation?
Chris?
Chris is going to be why. What's your why?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
What's your why? Why are you
Yeah.
doing it? Why are you as a person doing an ERP implementation? Why do you do what you do? And if you're a business watching this, thinking about, I'm about to start on an ERP implementation journey because you're a CFO, an FD, or a CEO, and you happen to be watching this, looking for some pointers. Why are you doing it? What's the benefit to the business? Why are you, implementing this? It's the biggest transformation journey you will go through as a business. So you need to know why you're doing
it. Jim?
For me, I would address the listeners similarly to Chris for both, whether you're a partner or a client. The most important thing is that ERP success is not about the software. I think for me, an ERP program, it's about alignment, it's about ownership, as I've said 1,000 times before, disciplined execution between the partner and the client. These are the key elements for a success of a program. But for partners and for consultants, the most important thing for me is what mentioned earlier. It's not about the software, it's about the value added into the business, is what new solutions are you bringing in? How can these scale with the business? And if this is the mindset, then you're on the right track for a good delivery.
it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for coming on. It's been really insightful, and the first time I've actually had this dynamic where we've got partner and end user. And yeah, it's been really good. I hope that our listeners have enjoyed it. To everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. You can catch us on both YouTube and Spotify, and you can also follow myself or Source and Connect on LinkedIn, where you'll get updates on the podcasts and episodes coming up. So thanks so much again, Chris and Jim, for coming on. It's been a great episode.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's been really good.
No worries.